Good afternoon, and welcome to another session of ENG3E. That's grade 11 Workplace English, brought to you by WASA Distance Education Center. I'm your instructor, Mike Laverty, and today's date is Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023, and this marks class 22 of ENG3E Term 2A. We are continuing our discussion of the unit assignments from Unit 4, which is the second last unit of ENG3E, or if we want to throw a $10 word in there, it's the penultimate. So penultimate is the second to last, so it's the second to last unit. Once we're completed those 5 units, we'll have our discussion on the final exam and taking stock of the entire course. But for now, we are working through 2 of the unit assignments, so 10 and 11. So today's class will give you insights into answering unit assignments 10 and 11. We are in week 6 of term 2. The last day of this term is April 14th, and please note that the graduation day is quickly approaching, and it is June 15th. So that's the final date where you can submit assignments for this course and any other courses you may be taking in WASA. Well, I guess, yeah, technically it's the final date, but I know most teachers, myself included, would really hope that we're not receiving work on graduation day or a whole bunch of work in that final week. But I understand life gets busy, but as much as possible, you should have your assignments submitted early that week, or preferably, the first week of June. But just as a reminder that that date's coming up, and you've got some weeks to go. About 12 or 13 solid weeks of classes, and of time where you can devote yourself to finishing off a credit or maybe 2. But just be aware of how long each course can take, and we do chunk them up into 9-10 week courses for a reason. We believe, and I believe, that's a reasonable amount of time you need to complete one of these assignments. Alright, so we have completed units 1, 2, and 3. We're working on Unit 4, which we started last week, Week 6, and we'll use up all of Week 7 talking about Unit 4, and probably need most of next week to do it justice. And then Week 7 and 8 we will devote to Unit 5, and have about a week and a half to talk about the final exam and do some course review. So if you're out there listening to us on 91.9 FM, thanks for joining us, or on Bell ExpressVu channel 972. You can phone in at 1-800-465-7144, or phone in at 1-807-737-4017 with a question, a story, a comment about any of the assignments, pretty much any feedback you want to give me as a teacher, or any question you have, or a concern you might have with the course, a particular assignment, even if it's a previous one, or one that we're not tackling today, that's totally fine. And you can also listen and watch live on Zoom. So if you go to zoom.us and then hit the join button, and then enter in our meeting ID, which is 417-6699-799. You can join that way. And of course, the videos are posted to my YouTube channel at Laverty WASA, so you can watch all previous lectures there, in addition to the other 2 courses that I teach, ENG3E and OLC 4.0. So all those classes are on there too, and of course, ENG3E. Reach out to me personally at mlaverty, MLAVERTY, at nnecschools.org, or you can find me on Facebook at Laverty Wassa. So you can add me as a friend, or we can simply just communicate through Messenger. If you have a question about the course, or if you want to submit assignments. So submitting assignments through Facebook Messenger is an appropriate way of doing that. It's my professional Facebook account. It's not my personal one. And so you can take pictures, or you can scan documents, turn them into PDFs, and then share PDFs with me through Facebook. You can also use Google Docs, or you can communicate with your DEC to get your work in. Please phone the Wassa office at 1-807-737-1488. If you don't know who to talk to, just hit 0 and the receptionist will help you out. My extension is 2211. You can also phone us at 1-800-667-3703. That's a free long-distance number. And just want to mention that now is the time to reach out to someone at Wassa, talk to one of our counselors. If you're thinking about graduating this year, if you think you're close, or if you have a question about your path to graduation, please phone that number and somebody will help you. If you're 5.5 weeks through the course, which we are now, you should have made contact with your teacher, and it's also important to keep in contact regularly with your teacher. Just checking in, letting the teacher know what assignments you're working on, if you're having any issues. You should have read or at least skimmed the study guide, units 1 through 4, so that's the handouts themselves. Units 1 and 2 should be completed, all the assignments, and you should be working on your Unit 3 assignments and, getting close to having half of those done, more or less. And I mentioned that suggested timeline because it's really important for you to get feedback from your teacher, especially. Well, I think any course you take, any educational path you take, if you've got a teacher, a mentor, someone who can guide you, then it's important to give them the proper opportunity to give you feedback. And just speaking personally, I find the most rewarding part of the job for me is reading your writing and reading your student work and reading your submissions. So I don't get bored of reading, like 10 people answering the same question. I always like to hear how different people approach a question and from their unique perspective. So I really enjoy reading work, and I love editing. So I love just reading a piece of work and not necessarily tearing it apart, but like just looking at someone's work and just and underlining where they've really used language in an effective way and strung some words together. And I like saying, great work, I loved your imagery here, loved your writing, and then just guiding them down a path, like just giving them some suggestions. So especially for this course, you've got it's give and take, and it does take time. And I do make marking my papers a top priority, but if I receive a whole bunch at one time, I inevitably have to be rushed and give your work back to you without the proper feedback. And so just keep that in mind. And it's always best to submit something. And if you're unsure of an assignment, just reach out to me. There's no wrong question to ask. And the only mistake you can really make is by not reaching out and not asking for help. And I've learned that in my life the hard way in many different ways. You get yourself into trouble when you don't reach out and ask for help. And so that's just me telling you that I'm here to help, and absolutely just reach out to me if you're having a hard time getting started or if you have any questions about your assignments. So today's lesson, we'll look at the article of the day, and we'll do our assigned textbook reading. So walking. That's from page 164 of The Road Ahead, which will help us answer unit assignments 10 and 11. So your learning goal is to do a close reading, or I guess maybe a close listen of an assigned textbook reading, walking, which is, of course, a short story. And I want you to review the elements of narrative. So we've talked about these elements of narrative in the past. in past classes, but I'm going to bring them up again. And your success criteria, you'll know you'll this is how you can gauge your success and know that after you've listened to my class, these are some check marks that you can check off. So, summarize the plot and cite important passages from the assigned reading. So I want you to do that. That's unit assignment 10 is asking you to describe the journey taken by our main character, Jackie, and apply your understanding of the elements of narrative to answer unit assignments 10 and 11. And the elements of narrative are characters, plot, narrative, conflict, theme. So these are just the ways that we talk about a narrative. And of course, a narrative is just a fancy word for a story, right? But it's a story told by someone. Either a first person I or a third person, Mike or him. But that's what we mean by a narrative. So here is our word of the day. It's about grocery stores, which I chose this story because our assigned reading, walking, the primary setting of that story is a grocery store. I worked in a grocery store many years ago when I was in high school. So the headline reads, "Pinched by inflation, consumers are buying less at grocery stores." So it's written by Matt Lundy, an economics reporter from the Globe and Mail, and it was published February 23rd, 2022. We have an image of two people shopping, and the caption reads, "While Canadian households are spending roughly the same at grocery stores, their money isn't buying as much as it did before the pandemic due to inflation." Photo credit Graham Hughes of the Canadian Press. So if you recall, on the third day of the week, I like to share an article of the day, and we break down the headline by the parts of speech, and then we have a look at the article itself, just to break down how the article was written, and hopefully learn a few things along the way. So our headline, "Pinched by inflation, consumers are buying less at grocery stores." So pinched is, of course, a verb and action word. By and at are prepositions. They're relationship words. So, written by me, by the way, it's a preposition. So pinched by inflation, which is a thing. Consumers, another thing. So inflation and consumers are nouns. People, places, or things. So consumers are buying. Buying is, of course, a verb. It's something that consumers are doing. And the verb are is an auxiliary or a helping verb. So are helping, they kind of work together to make one superverb. So they are buying less at grocery stores. The word grocery is an adjective that modifies the noun stores. So adjectives typically modify nouns, and they tell us what kind of noun we're talking about, or it gives us a description about that noun using the five senses, what it looks like, smells like, tastes like, feels like. It gives us some description of that thing. Because, most nouns are like general categories, like cars or cats or a desk, a table, a hat. And then we have adjectives to help us describe that thing and tell us how many there are and, what it looks like. So I'll read the first paragraph. In December, grocery stores in Canada sold about $9.3 billion of goods, not much more than 2 years earlier. But during that time, grocery prices have soared by 17.4% and counting, much to the chagrin of customers. Now, right at the start, you've got a prepositional phrase. So, in December, comma. The second paragraph starts, after adjustments for inflation, comma. So, Those introductory phrases are very useful, and I encourage students to use those in their writing. They set the tone, not set the tone, but they introduce key information, and they introduce like key context. So a preposition tells us when something happened or where something happened. So in this case, in December, comma, a whole bunch of stuff happened. Or after adjustments for inflation, all of this happened. So very important phrases to use and to master. I see that they're using the 2-word percent, which is very common in Canada. And so most Canadian newspapers will spell it per space cent, where in America you typically see the 1-word percent. My brain wants to edit that and change that. I want percent to be 1 word, but in Canada it's typically 2 words. And percent means 400 for every 100. Cent means 100. A century is 100 words. A cent is, 1 of 100 pennies, right? And percent means, of 100. Or, for every 100. Okay. So after adjustments for inflation, sales volumes at grocery stores have tumbled by 11.5% since the end of 2020, comma, according to recently published figures from Statistics Canada. Put another way, comma, so that's another introductory phrase, households are spending roughly the same at supermarkets, but because of inflation are getting far less bang for their buck. So basically, people are they're spending the same amount of money, but they're getting less stuff, which sucks, right? That's not good. There are, comma, however, comma, other factors at play. For instance, people are diverting more of their dollars to restaurants after COVID-19 restrictions were loosened. Royal Bank of Canada said that its cardholders are spending about 30% more at restaurants compared with before the pandemic. There's still pent-up demand for restaurants despite higher prices, RBC economist Kerry Freestone said. Grocery executives have also said that shoppers are trading down to discount brands or are switching to cheaper supermarket chains altogether for price relief. And so we don't have time to go through the entire article, but I just wanted to just emphasize how when we write articles, especially information articles designed to give the reader information where the primary purpose is to inform, that we introduce a main idea and then we back up that main idea with lots of examples, lots of proof, and in that sense you're telling a story, but you're always going back and reinforcing a main idea. And that's probably like the number one mistake that beginner writers make, or people who don't have a lot of experience writing, is they lose track and they lose focus on what they're really trying to talk about, and their writing kind of goes off in different directions, and it can be hard for the reader to follow. So just keep that in mind, that you as a writer, you should practice, especially when you're writing an information article. Bring up your main idea first. Identify a few ways you can back up that main idea, and then go into as much detail as possible or as necessary to convince the reader that you're right. The article ends off with the sentence, shoppers are left with a tough choice, colon, pay more or buy less. So the colon, which is 2 dots side on top of each other, is a very useful device, and it basically means, and here we go, here it is. So you introduce a main idea, and everything before the colon should be a complete sentence. So shoppers are left with a tough choice. That's a complete thought, but then we add the colon, and what is their shoppers are left with a tough choice. What is that tough choice? They have to pay more or buy less. So those are the two that's the choice you can do as a consumer right now. You can either empty your wallet even more, pay more money, or you can buy less stuff. And so that's and that's the last sentence of the paper, the article. It ends very forcibly, and it's a nice way to, you know, to give your reader something to think about and to sort of wrap up what you're talking about, wrapping up your main idea, right? So, and that is the main idea of that article. That, you know, due to inflation, we are spending the same amount of money, but we're getting less stuff. And so that's the short story. But, you know, to back that up, the author uses many examples. All right, so on to the assignments for Unit 4. So question 10 asks you to describe Jackie's quest in the story Walking. Half of a page, handwritten, so for 12 marks. So it's a longer assignment, which is why I wanted to devote a class to talking about this short story. And, you know, it's a great opportunity to break down a story and to, you know, talk about the elements of narrative and talk about ways that we can analyze a piece of writing and break it down. And this is important practice for your final exam, because during the final exam you'll have to do a very similar task, in that you'll be given a text to read, either an article like we just looked at, or a short story or a poem. So it might be fiction, it might be nonfiction, and you might have an example of both. But no matter what, you'll be given a text of some kind, and it'll be your responsibility to talk about that text intelligently, and make insights, and to break it down and to analyze it. And that's what, you know, being a communicator is all about, right? It's about communicating a message to other people, but it's also about, you know, being a student of communication itself. And as I've mentioned many times in this course, that mentality will take you far in life, depending on what job you have, right? Or depending on what kind of artistic pursuit you want to do, or, you know, any way you're creative in your life. If you're a musician, you know, it's important to study music and to break down music and understand how music works. But it's probably more useful to you to break down a specific song and to see how that song works, and how all of the different pieces of composition and theory kind of come together to make it. If you're a painter, it's good to understand different painting techniques and to read about them in books and to have somebody show you some. But it might be even more important and more useful to look at a specific painting and to talk about how the artist used those techniques to make that specific painting. And then when you break things down and you analyze them, you learn how they're made, and then that helps you make your own writing, right? So it's really just about paying attention and just breaking things down into their parts, but also seeing how they come together to make a story, right? So hopefully we can do that today by having a closer look at this story, Walking. So as I mentioned, it's on page 164 of our anthology, The Road Ahead. And it's a short story. It's one of the longer readings that we do in ENG3E, and we don't have time to read the entire story, but I do want to read a couple of passages from the book, and then just talk about some of these elements of narrative. So I'll read the kind of opening chapters, and then we'll have a discussion about that, and then we will break down some of the elements of narrative and talk about Jackie's quest in the story Walking. So Walking by Peter Ciaruta. Man, everybody in that school was famous for something. Laurie Brogan was famous for all A's. Borden Kosh was the football captain. Anna Marie Naylor had the biggest chest. But I was famous for walking out. It's not as good as being football captain, but when you're 5'3" like me, you better know they don't ask you to join the football squad. Screw it. I wouldn't want to play football anyway. So like I said, I was famous for walking out of that school. Just getting up and walking, right in the middle of an English class or something. At first, it was some big deal, but later on, nobody even cared. Or maybe they'd say, there he goes again, when I'd get up during social sciences test or something. But the teachers didn't chase after me in the hall no more. They didn't chase after me screaming, Jackie, you get back here, like Mrs. Duke done the first time I walked out. By the way, my name may be Jackie, but I'm no girl. I'm not like a Jacqueline or something. I'm just a guy named Jackie, and that's what it says on the birth certificate. Anyway, I want to tell you about this one time I walked out. It was a Monday, a real springtime type of day. All the windows open so you could hear somebody mowing the lawn, and the bells from the Good Humor truck, and it smelled really good. The flowers outside and the lawn. Who wants to be in school on a day like that? Everybody in that class would have liked to walk out. The most famous chest and the most famous football captain, and even Mrs. Fergus, the teacher. You could tell because she gave us some dumb essay on my most amusing friend, so she could just sit there at her desk and file her nails. But I guess I was about the only one who had the guts to really get up and do it. Nobody cared or noticed. Only reason I noticed is because you got to pay attention to yourself when your feet are moving. Out. That was about the only thought in my mind. Out. Behind me, some girl with a thin face and hot-shot hall monitor armband was saying, do you have a pass? But I kept walking. Just turned off my ears and let my feet do the talking. Walking. And when I got out, first place I was looking for was that Good Humor. That's the ice cream truck. No luck. Then I remember what my dad always says about me eating candy and ice cream. Don't. I'm not supposed to eat them because they make me hyper. My dad likes me to eat fruit instead. That's okay because I like apples and stuff too. I just wish they sold apples off a truck like ice cream. The problem with apples is you got to go someplace special to buy them. You can't get them from 7-Eleven or down at the beer and wine store. But the only place I know to get fruit is grocery stores. And I hate grocery stores. Everybody always follows you around because you're just a kid. They think you're going to steal. A long time ago, my dad said, if I ever catch you stealing, I'll bust your ass. And he would, too. I remember one time I went up to a grocery to buy some cream of mushroom soup for my dad's dinner. Man, they followed me from aisle A to aisle K. The guy who followed me carried a box of spaghetti in one hand and pretended to be just some other shopper. But he didn't have a coat on, and it was like January or something. I mean, is anybody that dumb? So while this guy's following me, why do I see this girl from my typing class, Lydia McIntyre? Well, she's pushing a shopping cart and walking like she always does, like she's trying to touch her forehead with her nose. Nobody gives her look number 2, even though in our class she's most famous for being a klepto. All right, so that's the first couple of paragraphs from the story. And, you know, I just want to break down some of these quickly, these elements of narrative. So one of the elements of narrative is the kind of narrative it is. So in this story, it's a first person narrative. So that's the I, right? Which is Jackie. So this is Jackie's story, which is really important, right? So Jackie is the one telling the story. He's our high school student. So the whole story is coming from his perspective. Everything we read, aside from the dialogue from other people, like in that first passage from the hall monitor, that was, of course, words spoken by somebody else. But when we're not hearing dialogue and we're just hearing Jackie's voice speaking in that I did this, I'm 5'3", then we're getting his inner thoughts, right? So that's what this story really is. It's like Jackie's inner world is being communicated to us, the reader, right? Characters are just quite simply who's in the story, right? So we've got Jackie. We've got his classmates. And then we'll get some other characters as we go along. So we've got the plot. Actually, no, we'll save that for another page. We've got the setting. And so far, we've got the school where Jackie goes to, and which, of course, he walks out of. And let's see, we've got narrative, characters, setting. And then you have the plot, you know, what happens in the novel. You've got the conflict. Maybe we'll put conflict and theme over here. So these are like there's many elements of narrative, but these 6 are I would say that they're the most foundational, the most easiest to talk about, and they're the ones that we're going to focus on for this assignment. So narrative, characters, and setting are usually the easiest ones to figure out. The narrative is really easy to figure out. It's either going to be first person, second person, or third person. There's other kinds of narratives, but just know that it's a first person narrative. The characters are simply the characters that are brought up. We have main characters, secondary characters, tertiary, which means third characters. So you have your main characters who are directly involved in the story. The story's about them. Then you have secondary characters, which are like important, and they have direct relationships with the main character. Those are like your secondary characters. And then you have like third characters or tertiary, which would be like the hall monitor, right? Not very important to the story, but it's a character nonetheless. And then settings, setting is time and place, right? It's good to keep that in mind. Setting is not just where something happens. Setting is also when it happens. And I should also look at assignment 11. And assignment 11 is, what is your opinion of the story Walking? Do you think it's a good title based on what you have read? Why or why not? Okay, so and it's important to note that, you know, right off the bat, you know, he does mention the word walking several times, and our narrator, our main character, which another word for main character is protagonist. So our protagonist Jackie is known for being the guy who walks out of stuff, right? So when life gets hard, he walks out, and he's very aware of his position in school. So it kind of sounds like he's been bullied for being short, and he's very aware of like other people and who's famous and who's popular, and that seems to be on his mind. It's something he wants to talk about, and you know, and he mentions his dad here, so it seems like he's close with his dad, or his dad, you know, has given him advice in the past. So basically, he starts the day off in school, and he's telling us about this one time that he walked out. So this is an important story that Jackie wants to tell us. So, you know, I mean, Jackie keeps walking. He goes by other stores. He walks by a dentist office, and then he sees a store, and he says, I didn't think the store even had a name, because all the sign said was fruits and vegetables. Later on, I found out that's the name of the store, Fruits, Vegetables. I don't think it's a very good name for a store, especially since they sell some other stuff, like milk, eggs, and salami. Outside the store was a big table filled with grapes and watermelons and cans of tuna fish. I don't know why the tuna was out there either. A fat man in a purple apron was standing in the doorway, reading a book with a map on the cover. I don't trust people who read a lot. I squeezed past the man, and I really mean squeezed, because as little as I am, his stomach was so big it almost touched mine. And it wasn't just a beer belly like my dad. I'm talking fat face and arms and legs and fingers. Probably toes, too, if you could see him. Good morning, he said. Or is it afternoon now? It was afternoon, but I just lifted my shoulders like, I don't know. I don't like people asking me questions. The apples didn't look too good, so it took me a long time to pick a few out. While I was picking through them, a kid about my age or maybe older came through a swinging metal door in the back of the store. He was wearing a purple apron, too. The kid's face was so shiny you'd think his nose would slide right off it. Then there was his hair, and man, he never stopped fooling with it. You know, combing it, pushing it down, pulling it back. I didn't think he should be doing that around so much food. Hey, Pop, he said, I'm going to go over to take a look at Davy's new car. Oh, no, you don't, said the fat man, putting down his book. Both of them talked funny, like maybe they weren't born there. I pretended I was looking at Grapefruit because it sounded like they were getting ready to fight, and I like to watch fights. You said I could go to see that car, said the kid. I said you could do it after you cleaned out the walk-in. You done that yet? The fat man started to get kind of sweaty, like he knew they was going to fight. Can I come back tonight and clean the walk-in, said the kid, almost like he might back down. Who's going to open the store for you tonight? I got classes tonight. Classes? I couldn't believe it. The man must have been 40 or 50 years old. All right, so we've got the two of the secondary characters of the story. We've got the store owner and the the store owner's son, which I think based on what we've just read, that they are an immigrant family. The man is reading a book with a map on the cover, so I don't know if he's reading an atlas or if he's trying to learn more about the country he just moved to, or not sure what. That's the only indication we've got. And so Jackie hears that they need help at the store, and then and then he thinks about it. And then he says, I thought about all the times my teacher said if I didn't pay attention and learn something, I'd never get a job. And this sounded like a job. I wondered if I'd still have to go to school if I had a job. So he's a little bit naive, and he doesn't really understand the world just yet, but he's certainly got his opinions. He thinks that maybe if he gets a job, he doesn't have to go to school, which I don't think is probably true. I'm sure his dad would think differently. And so he says, you need someone to work here, mister? And he says, you know somebody who needs a job? I said, yeah, me. The kid busted out laughing. You? What are you, like 10 years old? People think just because your size is little, your age is little too. I hate that. I told him I was in high school, and he started laughing even harder. Around here, we can't get into school if we're not wearing our picture ID clipped in our collar or belt. Luckily, I still had mine on, because he didn't believe me until I showed him the Cody high school ID. It's funny, but I thought I liked that kid until he started all that laughing. Then I liked his dad better. His dad said, have you ever worked in a store? I sold things before, I said, which is really true because once a month my dad and me rent a booth at the flea market and sell stuff we make. All right, so he wants a job, and then Ricky talks about the remedial classes that he takes. So he's taking like the lowest level of classes at his school, but of course he still thinks even though he's taking these courses, he still believes in himself. And he goes on to say that it seemed like somebody was always trying to put him down for not being smart enough, not being tall enough. His hair is too short and red, like the battery all rusted on top. Kids and sometimes teachers called me Red or Pee-wee or Shorty. One time a teacher back in middle school even called me a dummy. So this poor guy Jackie is getting made fun of. Sounds like he's getting bullied, but he wants the job, and then he gets the job. The fat man told me he'd pay me $3.50 an hour, and then I should start right then. He said he'd find an apron for me. So it's kind of, not the usual way that we find jobs, but sometimes it does work, especially if someone's desperate enough. So he does get the job, and then the rest of the story from there is talks about it talks about his experiences with Larry. He mishears his name as Larry Puckaholic. I don't think that's his name, but that's what he hears. So Larry hires him. Nobody ever did tell me the kid's name, but everyone just calls him Junior. Uh, even some of the customers. So I guess that was it. So we've got his journey here, and then we know that the characters are Jackie, his classmates. We've got Larry, the store owner, and we've got Junior, which is Larry's son. My first job was to clean out that walk-in, which the job that Junior was supposed to do. Turns out a walk-in is a giant refrigerator filled with fruits and vegetables. It was in back of those metal doors in a place called the stockroom. Junior was supposed to help me, but he just sat on the sink back there and bitched. It ain't fair. He's paying you $3.50 and I'm only making $7.75, he said. He's paying you $3.50 and I'm only getting paid $3.75. I thought it was pretty fair considering he wasn't doing anything and I was working my butt off. First, I took all the fruits and vegetables out of the freezer and piled them on big tables. Some of the fruit was loose and some was in heavy boxes. It took a long time to get all that out. And when the big metal shelves was all empty, I took them out by the walk-in. They weren't too heavy, but they was so cruddy, they looked like they had a skin disease. And you'll notice Jackie's narrative is he's got he's got lots of grammatical mistakes, right? He doesn't speak quote-unquote proper English, right? But that's part of his style, and it tells us who he is as a character. They were too heavy, but they were so cruddy they looked like they had a skin disease. Finally, I took out these wooden boards that covered the floor. They were pretty big squares, all slatted. Junior didn't seem too happy about the way I was working. He asked me, did I want to go out in the alley and smoke a joint? When I told him I don't touch that stuff, he looked like he didn't believe me, and then he went out there by himself. So, Jackie goes in, does a great job, and then when he asks, he goes, when Larry saw the walk-in, he said, holy cow. I said, is it okay? I never saw it so clean, said Larry. And Junior said, I showed him how to do it. Don't give me that, said Larry. Your idea of cleaning up is to sponge off any part of the wall that doesn't have a rack in front of it. And so from there, you've got the conflict between Junior and, you got this conflict between Junior and Jackie, right? So that's one of our conflicts. We've got Junior versus Jackie. And I would also argue that we've got one of our conflicts would be Jackie versus the world, right? Jackie's opposition to everybody and everything. He's a very kind of conflicted, torn young man. And so the plot, and the plot is simply what happens in a story. So we got, Jackie walks out. Jackie gets a job. And then we've got Jackie feuds or fights with Junior. All right. So Jackie goes home, and that night, and then he says this. That night, I told my dad I got a job. We was playing cards when I told him. We do that a lot. We're the only people I know without a TV. He says that there's enough killing going on here in Detroit without watching it 3 or 4 hours a night. So there we go. That's the setting is you got the school, you have the store. It takes place in Detroit. Just getting some important details about the story. Mostly we make things downstairs in his workshop. Duck decoys, stools, and bookshelves to sell at the flea market. Or we play table hockey or cards. He also tells me about some of the stuff he reads in the paper, and this is the worst part. Every night I got to read him an article from the Reader's Digest, because he says by that time of the day his eyes get tired. Man, it takes forever to read that damn thing. And I got to read every word, no skipping, and if I don't know how to say a word, I got to look it up in the dictionary. So he's got a good relationship with his father. And the father is okay with it, but he just tells him to make sure the job doesn't interfere with his school, right? So his dad's got high expectations, and sounds like they don't have a lot of money, but I think the dad sounds like he's happy that his son is working, right? So, and then the rest of the story, you've got the fight between the conflict between Junior and Jackie. That's most of the story is sort of preoccupied with that struggle. I think that Junior is jealous of the approval that Jackie's getting from Larry, the store owner. He wants that approval. He doesn't want to put the work in to get it, but he wants it, and he doesn't like it when Jackie's getting the attention, right? Um, and so he's throwing eggs at him, making a huge mess, um, and then when his father comes back, the passage reads, "Junior's face got even shinier, like it was about to burst." Well, I'll tell you, Pop. He waited like he was trying to think of a good one. I'll tell you, I told the kid we needed more eggs, and he told me to go to hell. He didn't want to get them. So I came back here and got them myself, and I thought I heard somebody out front fooling around with the cash register. I was rushing so I could catch him, and that's when I saw him dropping the eggs. It was the biggest lie I ever heard. And then Larry goes, yakety, yickety, yakety, yakety, yee, yee, yee. So he sort of makes fun of his own son. And so he doesn't believe him at all. And then, of course, Junior locks him into the walk-in, and thinking he can't get out. But he figures it out. He figures it out, and he gets out of the situation. And so he tries to lock him in there, but he knows it's usually no big deal because it opens from the inside. But I could hear Junior dragging something over, probably one of the big tables, and pushing it up against the door. Sure enough, when I tried to open the door, it wouldn't even budge. So he traps him in the walk-in refrigerator, and then I had the idea of my lifetime at that second. I thought about how you didn't have to open the big door at the back of the walk-in to get the eggs. Somewhere behind all those boxes, way over on the right side, was the little door where you could pull out the one crate at a time. That little door was little, but so was I. So he knows this because he spent so much time cleaning out that room that he knows there's this little tiny door. So he gets out of there, and then he catches one of his classmates shoplifting. And then he has his final altercation with Junior, and the last passage, the last two paragraphs read, "I turned toward the door. I wondered what Larry would say when he found out I was gone. I guess he wouldn't trust me in charge of the store no more. I guess I wouldn't even be working at the store no more. My feet hadn't took a step yet, but inside myself I was walking. Hell, I was running. But I wasn't sure where I was running to, or what I'd do when I got there. When I figured that part out, I'd walk. Maybe. But not until then. I looked at Junior and picked up a cantaloupe. He looked at me. I put the cantaloupe in the bin. He kept looking at me. When a couple of seconds went by, I still wasn't dead. I turned my back on him and started piling those cantaloupes one on top of the other. Finally, he swore real loud, and I heard the stockroom door slam. I turned around and saw he was gone. I felt so good for a minute there that I juggled a couple cantaloupes. You know why? Because I was still alive, and my feet was standing still. And so that's the end of that's the end of the story of the story too, right? So, you know, his 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 interaction with Jackie, or Jackie's interaction with Junior, becomes so hostile that he ends up walking out of that job, but not because he wants to or not because he's lazy, but just because Junior's made life kind of a living hell for him there in the working in the store. It's been such a bad experience for him, and that's one of the questions. Is the story is called Walking, and that's one of the questions you have to answer. What is your opinion of the story title Walking? Do you think it's a good title based on what you have read? Why or why not? 2 or 3 sentences. And when you talk about that, then you're kind of getting into the theme of the story. And so remember, the plot is sort of like surface level. It's simply what happens in a narrative. And theme is the deeper meaning of the story. It's the deeper meaning of the narrative, or plot. It's the main idea. So, the main ideas here I would talk about is, it's being yourself, or maybe being comfortable with yourself, being okay or comfortable with who you are. I would say that's kind of a theme here with who you are. Self-identity, just making your way in this life. Those kinds of things, it's a story about growing up. It's about Jackie becoming a man. He's a young boy, and I think just being so small makes him self-conscious, and he is growing up. He's becoming older, that kind of thing. But I think that's important to talk about. And his identity is tied up with walking, right? So that's maybe why they call the story that. So Jackie feuds with Junior. He gets approval from Larry. There's the big fight. There's the shoplifter. And, of course, when he walks out at the end, right? Right. We know that we know that he walks out of the grocery store eventually. If you pay attention, though, the last in his mind, in his mind, he's telling us the story, but he's standing still. He says, he feels good, and you know why? Because I was still alive and my feet was standing still. So right, so his self-identity is the boy who walks out of things, right? But in the very last sentence of the novel, the very last scene that he leaves us with is him standing there as he's just about to walk out of the store, right? But it's important that he's standing there, he's not moving, his feet are on the ground. He's thinking about walking, and in his mind he's running. But in actuality, he's actually just standing there. So that's some things to keep in mind that will hopefully allow you to finish off these 2 questions, right? So you've got to describe Jackie's quest in the story Walking, and you've got to talk about the title Walking. So hopefully I've given you enough to go on. that can help guide your responses to unit assignments 10 and 11. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow for class number 23.